Hello, my name is Marilee Rasmussen. I'm a lawyer in private practice in Saskatchewan, and over the last 30 years, I've acted for most of the self regulating health professions who will be subject to the new Regulated Health Professions Act. That act was enacted earlier this year by the Saskatchewan legislature, and I'll be referring to it as the RHPA. As the name implies, a self regulating profession is one that regulates itself by setting and enforcing standards of conduct and competence. It is not regulated by the government, but the government provides authority to self regulate through legislation. The RHPA does just that. However, the RHPA also puts limits on what a profession can do to regulate itself. The most important restriction is that the profession must regulate itself in the public interest and not in the interests of its members. This is the primary function of a regulated profession, to regulate in the public interest. The RHPA as a piece of legislation is a major change in the legislative framework for 28 self-regulating health professions in the province, and this includes all of the dental disciplines. Instead of having separate acts dedicated to each profession, the RHPA provides authority for the provincial cabinet, and that's the various government ministers, to make rules that are called regulations, designating the professions that will be subject to the RHPA. This legislative framework is in many respects similar to what is presently in each individual act, since for the last 20 or 30 years, the government has used a standard format for these acts, and the RHPA is built on that format. But there are also some major differences. An important difference is terminology. Words matter. In order to emphasize the regulatory purpose of the legislation, members of the profession will now be called registrants. This change in terminology is to make it clear that professions are not membership organizations serving the interests of their members. Duty and objects is another important provision that has been included in this legislation. It's been included in legislation dealing with professions in the last 15 or so years to set out clearly the duty and objects of the profession, which is, again, to act in the public interest. Bill 120, back in 2023, added that direction to all the Health Professions Acts. The wording explicitly states what the courts have been saying for years. The primary purpose of self-regulating professions is to regulate in the public interest, not in the interests of the members of the profession. If there is a conflict between the interests of members and the interests of the public interest governs. Bill 120 also allowed professions to make bylaws to either elect or appoint the members of their councils. This means that persons can be appointed who are not registrants practicing in the profession, but who have knowledge and skills that will be of benefit to the governance of the profession. Examples of knowledge and skills that can be obtained by appointment include financial or legal expertise. There could be many others as each profession decides. The authority to make bylaws has changed for most professions in the new RHPA. Although the Dental Disciplines Act has always allowed the council to make bylaws without having to have them approved or ratified by the membership, most professions' legislation did not. The dental disciplines model is now standard for all health professions as a result of Bill 120, and that is continued under the RHPA. However, the minister must still approve regulatory bylaws. These are bylaws relating to the topics listed presently in subsection 15.2 of the Dental Disciplines Act, and generally relate to matters such as setting qualifications and requirements for registration and standards for conduct and competence. Restricted activities is a new addition under the RHPA. The act will allow the provincial cabinet, again, this is the ministers that comprise the provincial cabinet, to make regulations or rules listing or describing tasks that will be known as restricted activities. These regulations will also say which professions can perform these restricted activities. I expect that the authorized practices presently listed in Section 23 of the Dental Disciplines Act will become restricted activities. For dental assistants, these include the introduction and manipulation of dental materials and devices in the mouth, orthodontic and restorative procedures consistent with an improved education program in dental assisting, and the exposure, processing, and mounting of dental radiographs in accordance with the Radiation Health and Safety Act of 1985, which actually has been repealed and replaced by the Saskatchewan Employment Act about 10 years ago. The RHPA also allows colleges to appoint practice auditors to audit the practice of their registrants. Persons who are presently practice advisors or clinical coordinators could be appointed to this new position. Practice auditors are empowered to enter and inspect a registrant's place of work, observe their practice, inspect equipment, and require the registrant to answer questions or provide access to records, including computer records. A failure to comply with the directions of the practice auditor is professional misconduct and would lead to a discipline complaint. The RHPA continues the expanded authority provided to professional conduct committees by Bill 120 to make sure registrants, employers, and others provide the information that the Professional Conduct Committee or PCC requests, or to comply with orders that it makes. The PCC can make orders relating to mediation, administering cautions, or requiring a registrant to complete a course. The process of investigation and discipline itself is largely unchanged, although there are some differences that provide more details about that process. Appeals from discipline decisions will go directly to the Court of King's Bench. The RHPA also provides for amalgamation, and that is if two or more professions wanted to be joined together under one regulating body, they can request to be amalgamated. They must apply to the Minister of Health and provide a rationale for amalgamation, as well as proposals for the transition to move from separate colleges to the amalgamated college. If the minister agrees, the minister will issue an order that will contain all the details of the transition to the amalgamated college. Assets and liabilities of the colleges joining together will become assets and liabilities of the amalgamated college. Government officials have said that the plan is to bring the new RHPA into force for all designated professions at the same time. This means that specific regulations will have to be prepared and enacted for each of the 28 professions that will be subject to the Act, as well as general regulations relating to rules that will apply to all professions and regulations relating to the restricted activities that I was talking about earlier. Government officials have indicated that they expect that this process will take 2 to 3 years. That might be a little optimistic, as there is an awful lot of work to be done, so we'll see how things unfold over the coming months.